Good evening, everybody. I'm Aidan Lang. I'm the General Director of Welsh National Opera, and it's my real pleasure, actually, to welcome you to the first of these webinars, these panel discussions. Very briefly, why are we here? Well, what has happened, I think, in recent years with certain key works in the operatic repertoire is they have evoked questions and perceptions among contemporary opera goers or potential opera goers, which may sometimes seem odd to those who know the piece and love the piece for all their lives. And yet we as Welsh National Opera, we have a stated mission to find ways to connect our work to the lives of people today. So we as an opera company are putting a very interesting position. Do we, as in the past, try to put all these ideas and topics into the production, or do we actually provide a context for a really interesting discussion around various themes which these works provoke? And of all the works, I think Madame Butterfly is in many ways the most contentious to a lot of people. And there are a number of themes which I think the piece gives up, and one of them really, and the subject of the topic of this first webinar, is really sort of inspired by the predicament that Cio-Cio-San, Madame Butterfly, finds herself in the story. She's 15, she's a geisha, her family are impoverished, she needs money, and she finds herself fundamentally in a position to be, what, to use our word today, trafficked. She's sold along with a house as a sort of pleasure package to the American Naval Officer Pinkerton. And we thought, well, this is exactly, looking through a lens of today, this is exactly the type of person who could be targeted by human traffickers, who are obviously very sophisticated in establishing a moment of trust with their victims and then exploiting them in one horrific way after the other. And it's a very thought-provoking topic, and in many ways has sparked a lot of thought within our production, as our director Lindy Hume focuses in very much on the true human suffering which Cio-Cio-San is undergoing. So we thought this would provide a really interesting context for the first of these discussion panels, and it's my huge pleasure to introduce you to Ann Williamson, who's the chair of tonight's panel. Ann moved to Wales 24 years ago, is that right? And has now been a civil servant for over 37 years, working in London, Wiltshire, and now in Wales. Ann has been working on the modern slavery agenda for over 10 years and established the UK Modern Slavery Training Group. This is a group which represents many sectors across the UK, and she's also a founder member of the Wales Anti-Slavery Leadership Group. She's working with the University of Wales Trinity St David to launch a Modern Slavery Studies MA, and was appointed Professor of Practice in August for her distinguished work in this field. So, Ann, thank you so much for chairing our panel, and I'll hand over to you to introduce us to our other panelists.
Lovely, thank you, Aidan. And can I just say, as you said, very thought-provoking and very brave as well in your production to obviously allow us to come in and work with you this evening. And very much good luck with Madame Butterfly and the production. I know you've all been working very, very hard behind the scenes, and it was rehearsals and then not rehearsals and then rehearsals. And with COVID, it's been a challenge for you as well. So, so we wish, as a panel, we wish you all the very best of luck.
Thank you so much. It certainly has.
So good evening, everybody, and welcome. And as Aidan's just said about, obviously, Madame Butterfly production is coming to Wales National Opera. It's coming into Cardiff very, very shortly. And it's quite timely because we are starting to approach International Anti-Slavery Day, which is the 18th of October every year. So this is just one of a number of activities that are going to be happening over the coming weeks. And we're very delighted that our One for Wales is the start of that. And that's this evening. I am absolutely delighted because I've got a whole host of speakers and colleagues and guests this evening, and I'm just going to run through them. And as we go through the evening, I'll be asking them to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about what they do and what their work is and the challenges that they have working in this field as well. So I am very, very delighted that I've got Heather Lewis from Brave Bear Trust. I've got Richard James, independent anti-guardianship. Got Richard Tumelty from policing. Ruth McKie from Soroptomists, Great Britain and Ireland. Mike Wilkinson from New Pathways. Ben Bruton from Bays, and Steve Chapman. And many of you will remember Steve because he was the anti-slavery coordinator for Wales. So I've got a whole range of guests this evening. Please also, as you go through the evening, we're going to be with you for about an hour. And please, if you've got any questions, please put that in the chat function in the Q&A section, and we'll try and cover as many of the questions tonight as we possibly can. So my first guest this evening is Heather Lewis from Brave Bear Trust. And Heather, welcome to this evening's webinar.
Anne?
So Heather, tell us a little bit about what it actually means to you and what modern slavery means to you.
Yeah, so modern slavery is the official term that we use here in the UK, and the government define it as recruitment, movement, harbouring or receiving of people. And that's done ultimately through force, so coercion and abuse. And really, when you kind of put that in everyday language, that's to treat someone as a commodity, to see them as profit and not as a person. And there's an umbrella term that we use at Brave Bear Trust, which is exploitation. You're exploiting someone. And within that, there's human trafficking as well, which can involve movement too.
Thank you, Heather. And obviously, Brave Bear Trust, I've read the book. I'm passionate about Brave Bear, but please tell our audience this evening, actually, what does Brave Bear Trust mean? It's a book about domestic servitude, but you wrote the children's book, so please tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So this, just as a visual, this is the book here, and here is Brave, a little teddy bear. Here he is, very cute. A few years ago, I was working for an anti-trafficking, anti-exploitation charity in Wales, and I was very used to raising awareness with adults and teenagers. But I then got asked to go into primary school and to deliver a lesson to 4- and 5-year-olds. And I thought, goodness me, how am I going to explain this really important message to them, but in an appropriate way? And the charity was linked in with a coffee roasting company that employs survivors of human trafficking and exploitation. And so I thought back to Toy Story in my childhood, and I brought the coffee roasting machine to life and named him Rory. And not long after that, I heard a real life story about a little girl who'd been rescued from exploitation along with her only possession she wanted, which was her teddy bear. And so I kind of brought that together, the idea of the assembly, where I brought the coffee roasting machine to life and talked about value and worth and paying properly for things, and this story of the teddy bear. And together with a team of people, we wrote this book, which is aimed at 8- to 10-year-olds and just helps them in a really gentle way to understand the story of Bella, who is a girl who's vulnerable, and her mum and her are tricked by someone who offers her what seems like a very good job and opportunity. And actually she's then trapped as a domestic servant in the house where she is forced to work. She cannot leave. And ultimately it's illegal. There is hope in the story. I won't give it away, but it's a story that helps to paint a realistic story in an appropriate way to help children understand about value and worth and exploitation.
It is just a fascinating book, and obviously the visual is great, but actually seeing Brave Bear, what are your plans for the future? Where do you want Brave to go?
We'd love them to go international, to be honest with you, Kim Ann, because we know that this is a really important message, and that if we can engage with children appropriately at a young age, they'll know that information for the rest of their life, and of course they'll go on to understand more as they get older. So the book is available in the UK, but in the US we have a US version too, where our signposting at the back is related to that. But we would love for Brave to be utilised. It's quite unique, I think, in that it engages, as far as we're aware, with children of that age group.
Yeah, and as you say, that young age group, very impressionable. I heard only the other day that I think children from about the age of 7 actually have that vision and what they want to do with their future, and how that kind of impact on life is with them at the age of 7. So your book is that age range, and hopefully with others as well, reading it. I mean, there's nothing better, is there, than sitting reading to a child. So I just seen in the chat function now, we've actually put the link to Brave Bear Trust. So thank you behind the scenes for sharing that for us. And it's not just about training though, Heather, is it? It's not just about learning. It's also about making sure that teachers, parents, guardians also understand the book as well, and understand domestic servitude, and understand about what is human trafficking, because we know, don't we, that there are so many people out there that don't think it's on our doorstep, don't understand it, don't believe it. So how have you overcome that?
Yeah, you're very right, because we want the children to engage this with us, but we want to do that in an appropriate and responsible way, so that the adults are involved, whether that's a parent, a carer, or a teacher, a social worker. And so we want to engage and equip them too. And so alongside the lesson plans or the questions in the book, and we work with mental health professionals to make sure that it's all tailor-made and suitable for them, we've produced with yourself and other professionals a robust online training package, which is just 30 to 45 minutes online, and it's free and it's accredited, so that any adult, whoever they are, can access that, be made aware and have that accreditation. And it gives real life examples, and we know that for the first time ever, more children than adults were identified as potential victims of slavery last year in the UK. And so education staff will come into us saying, we're putting devices into the hands of children to help them with their learning in the pandemic, but then we're also seeing an increase. And so we've focused in particularly on that online exploitation to equip any adult. And again, that's available on our website.
Lovely, thank you, Heather. And from me, I think obviously the children's book and the learning with teachers and guardians and carers, that does lift the profile not only of the book, but obviously around domestic servitude. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. My next guest this evening is Richard James, so International Child Trafficking Guardian. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about domestic servitude, because Richard, you work for Barnados, and I think there's some element of a whole range of different types of exploitation. But please share with us a little bit about your work.
That's right. Thanks, Kim. I would love to be an international child trafficking guardian, but I'm an independent child trafficking guardian.
And you know what? As I said it, I was thinking it's not. If only it was international, but we're very much independent. It's very much Barnados.
But yeah, it sounds like something to look at for the future. But yes, so independent child trafficking guardians. It's a role that comes from legislation. That's specifically Section 48 of the Modern Slavery Act, which came about in 2015. And within that, it states that all children who are potential victims of trafficking are to receive support from an allocated independent child trafficking guardian. Government hasn't quite rolled out this out to all areas across England and Wales as yet, but I think we're currently covering approximately 2/3 of all the local authorities in England and Wales, with a commitment to roll that out fully at some point in the near future. The method of that support varies dependent upon individual circumstances, really, but includes sort of best interest advocacy, instructing legal representation for the child where necessary, helping the child to navigate all of the complex processes happening around them, and to provide advice and guidance to other professionals working around that child on aspects such as safety planning and appropriate placements. This advice to professionals also includes aspects which do seem to be quite small in nature, but can actually have a significant impact upon the well-being of a child. So, for example, advising around items to aid in meeting religious needs of children we work with, such as prayer mats for Muslim children, brown cloth for Wahhaw Buddhist children, where possible translated Bibles for those children of Christian faith. We have a 24/7 guardianship assessment team who are able to receive referrals and provide advice and guidance to all those professionals encountering and working with child victims of trafficking. And they are available to be contacted so day and night, 365 days a year. I could probably talk forever about the role, but you might want to stop me there and just get a bit more detailed info on what bits are interesting.
Richard, in Wales, how many on your team?
We've had a little bit of an expansion recently with some new forms of the role coming through. So currently we have 7 of us covering all of Wales. So that's the 22 local authorities in Wales, 7 of us cover that. How many of us there are covering the rest of the local authorities in England, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but I imagine it's an equivalent amount based upon areas and geography, etc.
So from a Welsh perspective, how in the last couple of years, just give us a bit of an idea of how many children have you actually been into contact with and supported?
So it's difficult to give an exact figure because the children we work with, some get referred in for exploratory work, and then good news as a result of that exploration, young person perhaps isn't trafficked. So difficult to provide an exact figure right now, but do you want me to kind of go into a little bit of detail about the types of exploitation we see with those children? Would that be helpful? Yeah,
absolutely, because we hear about it all the time, don't we? We hear about the exploitation of children, but unless it's in the headlines, we don't actually see those that are actually working, boots on the ground, like you could self, is actually what you see on a regular basis.
Yeah, I agree. So I guess as a broad overview, the types of exploitation are kind of loosely categorized as sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation, organ harvesting, labour exploitation or forced labour, and domestic servitude. Of course, the latter there is what we've seen Heather talk about and what is in the Brave Bear book. And whilst Bella in that book just encounters domestic servitude by itself, sometimes this becomes a little bit more complex in practice, with there often being several types of exploitation taking place at once simultaneously. It's commonplace for those types of exploitation to overlap or for one to lead to another. So when we're working with children, it's important for us to kind of look at a particular situation holistically, rather than take a look at one specific part of that child's experiences, which is easy to do where one is a little bit more prevalent or easier to spot than another. Again, particularly relevant in regards to domestic servitude, because it is definitely one of those more hidden aspects or hidden parts of exploitation because of its very nature. In terms of the children we work with, these are from various backgrounds and sort of really extensive and different nationalities, often with vastly different life experiences. And what our service experience as a service shows is that there's no real set criteria whereby a child will only be vulnerable to modern slavery if they have a specific set of circumstances. We see children, like I've said, from extensive nationalities with various upbringings. And whilst it is more of a trend whereby those who perhaps have or do live in poverty are more vulnerable to that exploitation, we do also see children from affluent backgrounds and others from somewhere in between. So it's really important to kind of really keep an open mind when we're either looking for it as professionals, working with children, or even just members of the public, and how we kind of spot that and help children in question and professionals who work with those children to keep them safe. So there's been extensive research conducted by various organisations, and I suppose that the data from these does show us some of the common trends in terms of specific cohorts of young people. These, unfortunately, these trends at least include exploitation of Vietnamese children, cannabis cultivation or cannabis factories, nail bars, many Eastern European children, are exploited for labour at car washes, and organised theft and pickpocketing, and many Sudanese children are exploited for labour and domestic servitude, again as part of their journey to seek a place of safety whilst fleeing their home country, and that's usually travelling through places like Libya. And of course, all of these are just trends, and obviously just because a child is from one of these countries or has this nationality doesn't mean that this is their experience. But what we do see as a really consistent aspect in terms of working with child victims of trafficking is the stories we hear in terms of their traffickers and those methods that the traffickers utilize, in that their methods and means of exploitation is constantly evolving and adapting to the environmental changes and to evade law enforcement experts. So that's a consistent change. But yeah.
No, absolutely. And Richard, are you seeing kind of the same kind of trend? Because of course, last year there were over, I think, 10,000 potential victims of human trafficking in the UK identified. And for minors, obviously that's men, women and children. But for minors, it was very much seen as the exploitation type was criminal exploitation. Are you seeing still a lot of cases around the county lines that have always been hitting the headlines, or has trends changed since you've been in the last year or so?
I think absolutely. Obviously, the data shows that there are more children being identified. I don't necessarily think it's something that is increasing. I think that generally it's just an issue where we're becoming more aware and better able to identify those children who are victims of trafficking. I think it's obviously we've been operating for 4 or so years, nearly 5 years, and throughout that time, obviously we've conducted significant awareness raising throughout all the local authorities and areas in which we operate. But obviously you've also got a multitude of other organisations and services who are doing similar awareness raising. So I think very slowly we're definitely seeing an increase in awareness, and I think, yeah, absolutely the figures are absolutely right. And I hate to say it, but I don't hope that those figures increase, but I hope that they absolutely more accurately reflect the exploitation and the suspected exploitation that's taking place out there.
No, I couldn't agree more. And when you say about the figures, those over 10,000 in 2020 last year, and the year before that, the figures weren't dissimilar. And of course, we've had COVID, we've had lockdown, and those numbers are still quite consistent. So obviously, it's still happening. It's a fair point that you say around it's not just children coming from poverty backgrounds, it's affluent families as well, because we say, don't we, that ultimately us as human beings, we just want to be loved and we want to be looked after and want to be cared for. And at any time, which is my view, life can change at a moment's notice, and you may not feel vulnerable today, but you can become vulnerable tomorrow. So thank you for your insight, Richard. That's really interesting and thought-provoking as well, because obviously children vulnerability and the numbers that you are seeing on a daily regular basis is still heartbreaking, isn't it, for anyone that's in exploitative circumstances. But thank you. No doubt we'll come back to you later. Thanks, Richard. So
No
next, Richard, actually, that's on the panel this evening. So Richard Tumelty, good evening to you. And obviously you've got a wealth of policing background. So please tell us this evening the work that you've been doing.
Hi, well, good evening, everybody. My name is Richard Tumelty. I'm the Regional Coordinator for Modern Slavery across the southern region of the police in Wales. So I work alongside the David Powys Police, South Wales Police and Gwen Police. And I also liaise with North Wales Police, albeit that they sort of are covered in another part of Wales. But we take an all Wales approach to modern slavery. So my role is generally around upskilling police and trying to get standardise our response to modern slavery, because obviously the Modern Slavery Act coming in 2015 is relatively new legislation, and obviously there is still a lot of learning to be done, and there are stated cases and case law is changing all the time. So we sort of try and standardise the approach and then share best practice across the forces.
Lovely, thanks, Richard. Our understanding has been, because of course I've been in criminal justice for many, many years, people say that the policing and other agencies are first responders. So can you just explain a little bit about, well, what on earth is a first responder and what's their role?
Yeah, I think it's important to sort of delineate between, I think that the word first responder can be a bit misleading, because obviously it leads you to think it's the first person to arrive at a scene, for example. But in 2009, the UK government introduced the national referral mechanism, and first responder relates to the national referral mechanism. So if I'll sort of go through a little bit about the NRM and a little bit around first responders then, just to cover that. So the national referral mechanism is effectively, it's a framework for identifying victims of human trafficking and modern slavery, and it ensures that those rescued victims have appropriate support, which can take and are obviously recognised as victims as well. So that support can take the form of appropriate and secure accommodation, which is normally some distance away from their place of exploitation. It's access to emergency medical treatment, counselling, legal advice, healthcare, and many things like that. So the national referral mechanism was created for that purpose, to support victims of modern slavery and human trafficking. Within that, when it was designated, there were certain agencies who were actually called first responders in terms of the national referral mechanism. So a first responder is a designated organisation with the authority to submit a referral to that mechanism. So effectively, there were certain statutory and non-statutory bodies who were designated under the NRM to be first responders. So yeah, it is a bit of a confusing term, but that's what they are. So the police are designated first responders. There are certain agencies within the Home Office, like Immigration Enforcement, Border Force, the Gangmasters Labour and Abuse Authority, and also many other charities like Migrant Help. I'm sorry. Hello. Kim-Ann, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. If anyone's got their mic on, can they just turn their mic off, please? If you're not speaking, thank you. Yeah, Richard can hear you fine.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so effectively, as I say, there are other first responder organisations who actually then can access the NRM form, which is a digital form, and then make a submission to identify somebody as a victim. And in terms of that, basically, all they have to do is show that they suspect, but they cannot prove that they believe somebody to be a victim of trafficking or slavery or servitude. So that's effectively what a first responder is. And you've got examples like Rich, who just spoke from Barnados. Barnados are first responders. Mike, who's speaking later from New Pathways, they're also first responders.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. And that has dispelled the kind of myth, because when I first heard of the role of first responder, I was thinking, well, as a police officer, I'd like to think you was a first responder because you should be first at the scene. So it's about terminology. So thank you for explaining that. So in your policing perspective, obviously, we've got the national referral mechanism, which is great. That highlights the amount of potential victims identified on a quarterly annual basis. We know that last year for the UK, that was over 10,000. But how difficult is it actually to investigate a modern slavery case, prosecute a case, and ensure that that victim has that support all the way through that journey?
To be honest, it really is difficult. Modern slavery is a complex crime, and there are many nuances within the investigations as well. In the first place, it's it's not widely reported, to be honest. You know, I think the general public don't often recognise the exploitation and make those reports. And it's often called a hidden crime. It's almost like in plain view, but it's right under our noses, but not recognised. And there are difficulties in terms of that, in terms of the public recognising it, which is why we try and raise awareness in forums like this. But also there are difficulties with victims as well, in as much as, you know, victims can often have been through or are going through hugely traumatic experiences in their lives. And in order for them to sort of feel supported, we sometimes do have difficulty trying to sort of engage with them in that respect. Because one of the issues we do face is with the national referral mechanism. If a victim agrees to go into the referral mechanism, they can sometimes be moved, you know, plucked from one area of exploitation and moved to an area 2, maybe 3 hours away, where, you know, they're almost abandoned. Oh, yes, they are supported by agencies, but that we sometimes lose that connection with a victim. So what's crucial to our investigations is to you know, almost the golden hours at the beginning is to get that bond and effectively, you know, try and build some trust and rapport, because in many cases there's, you know, victims have that sort of fear of authority, and they've been let down by so many people before. You know, why should they believe or untrust somebody else? And so actually breaking those misconceptions, I suppose, and breaking down those barriers is very important to our investigations. It's also a very complex crime. There are sort of many different types of crime, and I think Richard alluded to that in his presentation earlier. That, you know, there are so many different facets. So there are different crimes within crimes. And so that makes the investigations complex, and inevitably they can lead to inquiries abroad, inquiries across the rest of the United Kingdom as well. Always intertwined is financial investigation, because we know this is very much a profit-driven crime. So that there are numerous sort of facets to the investigation that make it difficult, and it does require some specialist training, because, you know, your average responding police officer on the front line is not necessarily going to come across this day in, day out, and all of a sudden they're thrown into a complex investigation, you know, which they probably got no experience of. So that's part of the role that I try and do, is to signpost officers to the other agencies that can help, and to other sort of law enforcement agencies as well. It's very much a partnership approach as to how we try and approach these investigations. So there are many different strands to it.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. And as you say, that partnership approach, that surely has got to be crucial, because the police can't solve everything, and there's other agencies, as you've alluded to, that are supporting, and you've got victim care processes as well. Does everybody collaborate, or is there sometimes organisations working in silos, or for Wales is it very much a team effort?
In Wales, I mean, I think we're quite fortunate. We do have a very strong partnership arrangement in Wales, you know, as you know, part of the anti-slavery leadership that you're part of, leadership group you're part of. It's created that, and yeah, we do recognise that policing can't do this on their own. You know, we very much depend on the public. We very much depend on partners, and we can't be working with or supporting the victims all the time. So actually building a relationship with Barnados, for example, who have the specialist skills for spending time with, you know, child victims, is massively important for us. And yeah, we do have a good working relationship, and I think we're very fortunate here. In any sort of complex area, there is a tendency to work in silos, but we've worked hard over the last number of years to break those down.
No, absolutely. And finally, for me, you mentioned around obviously the financial aspect, because the exploitation of a human being is that financial gain. And we've said for many years, you can only sell drugs once. You can sell a human being time and time again. And my my strapline has often been follow the money, find the human. Have there been those types of cases in Wales, and have there actually been a number of cases in Wales that have hit the headlines, or is it sometimes not hitting the headlines, but there are investigations ongoing?
There are many investigations ongoing, but they do take a long time to come to fruition. You know, you can't, if it's a victim sort of led investigation where you're relying on the evidence of a victim to sort of take that prosecution forward, then you do have to wait, and you do have to, you know, understand the trauma and really take that time. So, you know, they'll have a long period of reflection, and very often victims may not even feel that they want to go through that all again, and we have to understand that. Now, obviously, if you're sort of back investigating something that's happened previously, it's very, very difficult then to make it an evidence-led. You know, the scene is gone, so your forensic opportunities are gone, or you know, you haven't got the opportunity to sort of make to use covert tactics, for example, and do proactive work. So very much those sort of cases can very much depend on the witness testimony, so to speak. And if we're going to identify, and we often do identify cases ongoing, then the proactive work is also very time consuming and very labor intensive. So yeah, they do take a long time. And as you know, there's a huge backlog in courts as well. And again, I think the polycriminality that we're seeing more and more these days, there's so many different strands to the investigations. We do get prosecutions home on cases that are not necessarily ending with a modern slavery charge, albeit we've convicted somebody of another offence, which again is a really, you know, it's a good disruptive tool. So yeah, you know, they don't always hit the headlines in terms of modern slavery cases, but there are numerous cases ongoing, and they can take various lengths of time. I think the shortest one I'm aware of is one in sort of Swansea area in the last 2 years. Was effectively a case where a young man was held captive in a scrapyard and really badly treated and badly assaulted. And the police were able to go to that scene and capture the evidence from the scene. And, you know, the evidence was overwhelming, and that case was concluded in a matter of months. Yeah, we have other cases. There's a labour exploitation case going on in the Gwent area at the moment, which has been running for 18 months. And the victims in that particular circumstance have been repatriated back to a country in Eastern Europe. And obviously maintaining those links with those victims now has been problematic. And we've lost one or two of those victim support in terms of that, because they've gone back to a life that they don't want to even go back in their minds to where they were. And so where we are with that case is the financial aspects, because their identities were used to obtain loans and mortgages and this sort of stuff. So again, these are complex cases, so whereby we're probably going to lose the modern slavery charges, but we certainly will get home with the fraud case. And it is difficult because, as I say, it's so complex and so diverse. And again, there are more and more sophisticated means being used by the criminals now in terms of, you know, online platforms, for example, adult service websites, and the phenomena of what is called a pop-up brothel, whereby victims are just moved around the country, and so that you end up with many different scenes in many different forces, and then there's a lot of coordination that needs to be done in order to pull those investigations together. So they do take an inordinate amount of time, unfortunately. But we have many cases. We have certainly probably at any one time 70 or more investigations ongoing. But in terms of prosecutions at the moment, we've probably got a good dozen, I would say, on the go at the moment in the southern part of Wales.
And when you say about 70, that's quite a large number, but I suppose of equal importance, of course, bringing those perpetrators to justice, but also, of course, it's the having saved the victim, making sure the victim is safe is paramount, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. You know, it's a very, very victim-focused approach. You know, and the safeguarding of the victim and is at the centre of everything. And if we don't get a prosecution, we've actually safeguarded somebody and changed their lives, then that's a huge plus for everybody. You know, certainly for us. Absolutely.
And ultimately, victim is safe. So thank you, Richard. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for your guidance and your overview as well. Fascinating. So thank you. My next guest is Ruth McKie from Soroptomists International, Great Britain and Ireland. And Ruth will be able to put a different focus on the voluntary sector and the work that's being done there. So Ruth, good evening.
Hello there. Sorry you can't see me. Perhaps you're not sorry you can't see me. But at least it gives me the opportunity to sit here and with my feet up in great comfort. It's my technical abilities that have let me down, I'm afraid. Sorry about that.
No problem, Ruth.
Sorry.
No problem, Ruth. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
Can you tell us, please, in what ways have Soroptomists been raising awareness for modern slavery over recent years?
Yes, I can. We've certainly been working both before and after the Modern Day Slavery Bill, which I think was 2015, to raise awareness of this awful crime and its associated evils, the various things that have already been mentioned. Firstly, we started, I think, by having speakers from various police forces and other organisations, including what Richard explained to us as first responders, New Pathways, Barnados, I think Salvation Army, people like that, to inform ourselves really about this thing. We've also sent people out, our own trainers. We've trained under the Train the Trainer programme. We have trainers that we've been able to then send out both to our own clubs and to other clubs such as WI and Rotary and all those sorts of clubs, and also to people whose day job it is to who may come across victims, such as we were able to send an awareness trainer to medical staff in a local hospital. Quite honestly, some of this work, I think, as people have said before, has been like pushing water up a hill, mainly because people did believe and still do believe that this doesn't happen here. And so the more actual stories we can tell, obviously not naming names, but stories we can tell that show them, it's just everywhere and quite horrific. In 2018, we organised a survey across the whole of the UK to show people's perception of slavery and what they thought about it. The findings from that survey formed the basis for the ongoing training programme, which at the time Kim Ann led, and also our UK programme director. In Wales, we participate. Oh, I said that. I've told you about the training. Some of that training also led us to participate in local fora, which was set up under the Welsh Government sort of leadership panel that's also already been referred to. And through that, we hope to understand local needs of each very different community area covered. And these fora send back findings and receive information and guidance from and to the operational panel, which in turn feeds into the leadership panel, which is where our strategy comes from for Wales. And finally, through to policy formation by Welsh Government. Flyers and pamphlets have been distributed across Wales, and so Helpline and other supporting information appears in, or now appears in hotels, motorway services, universities, airports, and places such as that. I'm sure you've all seen them. Handbag tags we've used. We are a women's organisation. We like our handbags, don't we? And other vast baggage that we carry around with us. And these handbag tags are able to start conversations. People will just talk to you and say, "What's that on your bag? What have you got on your bag?" And of course, women are very good at conversation starters. So that helps us a great deal. It gives you a lead in. You don't have to sort of march up to someone and say, hey, what do you know about slavery? They come to you and say, what's that tag on your handbag? These tags have actually been used in our own conference in Cardiff, and also they've been sent away by representatives in international conferences as well, which helps with the other end of the trafficking, if you see what I mean. I know a lot of trafficked victims come from within the UK anyway, but also a great many come from other countries, as we know. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, Ruth, you are absolutely right. It is an international crime, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. Conferences have also been organised in Wales for those who may be first responders. When I said first responders, I understood from Richard the points that he was making. I mean, the sort of people that may be those that first see victims, medical staff, doctors, midwives, those sorts of people. They attend these conferences so that it helps them in general with their awareness as well. And I think when they're with their own communities, they can formulate plans of action, which helps them get involved and tells them what to do when they suspect that they may be dealing with a victim.
No, you're absolutely right. And I'm sure there'll be many women listening this evening, Ruth, saying, you know, what are Soroptomists and what do they do? How can they find out a little bit more about, because I know 9 or 10 years ago when I started working on the modern slavery agenda, I didn't know what you did and where you were, and didn't appreciate that it was an international organisation. So how can women reach out?
It's a fact that we are very poor at making people aware of us. It's something that we really must try and improve, because we do a great deal of work. A lot of it isn't always serious stuff. A lot of it is pleasant and fun as well. But the best thing to do to find out about Soroptomists, I guess, is if you look on the SIGBI, SIGBI website, you can see all sorts of things. You can see the sorts of things we do. You can see where the clubs are. You can see, if you would like, how to become a member, things of that sort. And there are different types of membership, so you can do that. But the activities that we do vary a great deal. For instance, we've heard from Heather about the Brave the Bear books, which we already knew about. And one of the things that we do is to, or will be doing, is to distribute the Brave the Bear book and try and encourage the teachers that we hand them over to, if you like, to undertake the training as well. So that hopefully includes the very youngest generation, as Heather's already explained, in awareness of this crime.
No, absolutely. And thank you, Ruth. And thank you for the overview as well of all the fascinating and really important work that SIGBI are doing at the moment. You don't realise until you hear it, and you've explained it so eloquently, actually, how much work is going on there. So thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that with us this evening. I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Mike Wilkinson from New Pathways. And Mike, great to have you with us this evening, because you are going to give us that real victim sense of what's happening at the moment, what's happening in your organisation, and how actually victims are referred into you. So your agency works directly with victims. So Mike, please give us a bit of an overview on the work that you do.
Hi, good evening, Command. Good evening, everybody else. New Pathways, our primary role actually over the last 30 years is to provide specialist services for people who have been victims of rape or sexual assault. So we have a whole raft of services providing that kind of support, including the running of 6 sexual assault referral centres in Wales. There's 8 in Wales, we run 6 of those. So I'd like to say historically, we haven't provided services for victims of human trafficking. However, about 10 years ago, I listened to a talk at a conference by a retired police officer now, but somebody that's very prominent in this field, called Jeff Norman. I'm not sure if he was an ex-colleague of Richard's or not. And Jeff was talking about modern slavery and trafficking. And it dawned on me that we probably had been supporting victims of trafficking all along, but we hadn't been asking the right questions. So we'd had people come through to us, our support services, who were victims of sexual assault or rapes, and they'd come through our centres. And we just hadn't put two and two together and recognised that they had been victims of trafficking. Not, I don't say just, but not just a sexual violence case. This was also a trafficking case. So in terms of what we do now, we do have a dedicated trafficking project. However, because of the nature of our work and because of the likelihood that quite a lot of our clients have been victims of trafficking or exploitation in that way, we make sure that all of our staff, we've got about 130 staff and 40 odd volunteers, they're all trained in identifying the signs and symptoms of trafficking. We also have a dedicated points of contact within our teams that specialise in that and can take those referrals as well. So for external referrals, they would just refer into our normal referral streams, but if there's an element of trafficking or suspected, hopefully we'll pick it up, but obviously it's helpful if people identify that might be the case.
Lovely, thanks, Mike. How difficult is it though for a victim of trafficking to tell and share their story?
It's hugely difficult. The barriers are immense, depending on the nature of the victim, where they come from, where they originate from, the nature of the exploitation that they've experienced. Certainly fear of retribution. And their personal safety, that of their family members, and that's very real. I mean, a lot of trafficking is perpetrated by organised criminal gangs who are quite ruthless. So that is not a hollow fear. So the fear of repercussions is very real. There's obvious language barriers for people that have been trafficked from outside of the UK. Also, I guess this falls into that category as well. There's a distrust of authority. I think some of the countries where people are trafficked from, the authorities, they don't take too much of a hard line on it. And in some countries, you know, there's strong evidence that they're actually complicit in what's going on with the criminal gangs. So coming here and expecting them to trust a police officer is probably foreign to them, and it wouldn't come natural. There's also cultural issues in terms of shame and stigma. We've worked with clients that have been forced into sexual exploitation, and even though they've been liberated from that situation, for them to go back home to their communities, even though their communities would probably recognise that it wasn't through their own volition, their own choice, they will still fear of being shunned or stigmatised and risk to personal safety in that respect as well. But one of the biggest things we see, I mean, yes, we talk about people from various countries, whether it's Albania or Vietnam or Eritrea or whatever. The most of the people we support that are victims of trafficking are UK nationals. And a lot of those don't actually recognise that they have been victims of trafficking in a lot of cases. And I'll give you a very brief example of that. We've supported quite a lot of young girls that are in looked after care, for instance. That tends to be a common story that comes up quite a lot, where they're quite vulnerable anyway. They will be approached by somebody that shows an interest in them. They may buy them things like mobile phones, trainers and stuff like that. They call it kind of the lover boy syndrome. Yeah. They don't recognise they're being exploited. They just think for once in their lives somebody cares about them and somebody shows an interest in them, and that's fraught with danger, trying to get them to recognise that this person is exploiting you. They're not your boyfriend. No,
absolutely. And by them feeling that, and as you say, there's that shame element, and once they've got past that and they've shared their story, you do a lot of work around giving that support. But is there more support needed? I mean, you do a fantastic job with New Pathways, but yeah, is there any gaps in provision, Mike?
There's plenty of gaps in provision, and yes, whatever field we work in, we're all going to make a shout for extra resources and extra cash, and that will not come unless we get the awareness raising right, unless we get the numbers through the NRM increasing consistently, unless we get the identification right. So yes, we can talk about what services need to be provided. And yes, we provide counselling, advocacy services. As Richard said, we're a first responder organisation. But unless the public recognise and identify victims of trafficking, unless victims know what support is out there, we're in a bit of a hiding to nothing, really, unless we create an environment that's safe for people to come forward and say, look, I've been a victim, or to even recognize that they have been a victim. Then, you know, it's always going to be an uphill battle. Also, public attitudes as well. There's always an outpouring of public empathy and support when we see things that are going on in Afghanistan at the moment, or a couple of years ago in Syria, but that wanes, and it gets muddied in the whole agenda about asylum and people's perceptions of economic migrants and stuff like that. And unless we have an informed public, we're going to find it really difficult, I think, to address this issue.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And that's a bit of a shout out, Mike, isn't it? Around, especially for our listeners dialing in this evening, members of the public, understanding the signs to look out for and what to do when you find that information is absolutely key. So I'm grateful for you sharing that and almost having that shout out that's needed. And it's not just about, like, we're here today in the run up to Anti-Slavery Day, but it's about every day, every week, every year, just making sure that we raise that awareness. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely right. But and just a really big thanks to the Welsh National Opera for this. I mean, I've been to the opera myself many times. How many people will sit in the audience at the Millennium Theatre and not even join the dots and think, okay, think outside of you know what the story about Madame Butterfly is, and relating that to today and what's going on. So
no, you're absolutely right, and very, very brave to do that as well and highlight it. So we're very, very fortunate, and I'm very fortunate to have you with us tonight. So thanks, Mike. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
My next guest is Ben Bruton from BEIS, which is Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, on the call, I'm conscious of time. We're just tipping 8 o'clock, but I hope you'll stay with us. I've still got two guests, and they've got some very, very exciting and insightful stories to share with you. So I hope you'll stay with us. So Ben, good evening.
Good evening, everybody. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Lovely that you're with us, Ben. Thank you. Ben, I know you're a civil servant. I know your department are doing a lot of work on the modern slavery field. Just tell us a little bit about what BEIS do in this area.
So as a Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, we have a lot of cross-cutting interests, not only in kind of the way that business operate, creating a level playing field for business. Some of that involves making sure that businesses can compete fairly with each other on the same regulatory frameworks in the right way. As much as that can be, you know, controlling energy tariffs or caps. It also includes labor exploitation. So in my area in labor markets, for instance, we have national minimum wage policy. So controlling national minimum wage, making sure that people get paid fairly for the hours they work. And obviously the Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate that I am the head of, that regulates all recruitment businesses and agencies in the UK. We also obviously work very closely with our colleagues in the Gangmasters Labour Abuse Authority and HMRC operational colleagues who look after the operational side of national minimum wage for us. So BEIS surprisingly has a huge agenda on making sure that labour exploitation and fair markets exist. Obviously, one way in which you can tip the balance in your favour in terms of competitiveness is to use, you know, slave labour that costs you absolutely zero, and therefore you can undercut margins and create an unbalanced playing field. So that's one of the ways in which we engage. We're also heavily engaged in all the free trade deals that are going on at the moment around the country for the UK, and a lot of that is about kind of making sure that we know that the supply chains coming into the UK are as free from exploited labour as humanly possible.
So how do businesses actually achieve that, Ben?
It's a great question. So it's not an easy ask of business. Obviously, the 2015 Act and government's commitment to go further recently in September 2020 has said that we need to do more in this field. But in 2015, the Modern Slavery Act had a commitment that that anybody who had a total of earnings globally of over £36 million had to write a modern slavery statement that looked at making sure that they'd done due diligence on their supply chain, really publicly stated what they were trying to do to make sure their products and their business was free from slavery. And that was the starting point. The government, as I alluded to before, has called for evidence on whether or not that was good enough or big enough and had gone far enough. And actually government was really clear when they had the response that it's, and I quote them here, where government said it's not enough for government and businesses to simply say they do not tolerate modern slavery. As we take stock of both the challenges faced and the achievements made, we must match words with actions. And so government is committed to going further, mandating specific topics that these modern slavery statements must cover, requiring statements to be published on a new government-run modern slavery statement registry to make sure that businesses don't avoid their obligations in publicising what they're doing, setting a single reporting deadline and introduction penalties, financial penalties for business for not doing it. So I think government's going a long way in kind of building in the legislation to make sure that businesses do what they must do. I think it's already been alluded to. I think businesses have a role, the public have a role in kind of what we do and how we do it. I think for businesses, there's a bit of a checklist I came up with just about half an hour ago, actually. But carry out a risk assessment. So look at your own supply chain, look at your risks around where modern slavery could infiltrate your business and what you can do around protecting it. Think about whether a statement is required. So there is that monetary value of 36 million globally, which is huge. It's a really high number. You know, small businesses should just think, actually, what can I do? If I'm using a local farm, if I'm using a local supplier, how can I make sure they're kosher? How can I make sure that, you know, they've taken the right steps? And maybe I should just publish a statement anyway and saying, like, I've taken those steps. It's commercially viable in terms of a selling point to get people to buy your product, a bit like the red tractor for, you know, British made foods, etc., etc. That liaison with suppliers is another one of those checklists you might want to do, make sure that it's all clear. Develop and implement your own anti-slavery policies around informing staff, making sure your business is a safe place for victims to come into if they need to. Change your contracts. There's a lot that regulation can do and a lot the regulators can support businesses with. And so you change your contracts to make sure and impose sanctions on your suppliers to be conforming with the law, the legislation and with the act, then, you know, that goes a long way. We talked about training. Obviously, that's a key bit, and make sure you have the right procedures in place to kind of deal with issues as and when they arise. So I think there's a lot that businesses can do. And I think there's a lot they are doing. I think Mike has already said that, you know, the huge part of this is, you know, not just business, not just government. It's about public awareness, about public knowledge. It's about the way in which public engage with this topic, understand this topic, and become the eyes, the ears of government, of police, of enforcement bodies, of first responders. Because, you know, we generally all can make a difference, change people's circumstances and save lives, which is what we all want to do.
No, absolutely, Ben. And I suppose as well, you've talked a lot about business. I'm grateful for that. Talked about supply chain. But ultimately, you and I are consumers, aren't we? So as consumers, is there anything that we can do to try and turn that tap off?
Again, you know, if you look at every product you buy and try and trace the supply chain back to make sure you're buying something that's completely slavery free or exploitation free, that way lies madness, I fear. But you know, if we all committed once a week to just change a product or think about changing a product or making sure that product is right, then step by step, consumerism is a huge tool to kind of change people's habits and purchasing processes. You know, we all can sit here and say to a certain degree that, you know, we have a certain amount of power to do that. There are people in this country that don't have that power. So that's where business role comes in, where you do have consumer power. Then there is an opportunity to think about where you buy, how you buy, whether it's free trade, whether it's, you know, you can do a little bit of due diligence about, you know, where you're buying from. All of those things will make a difference. But, you know, what we need is business really to step up to the plate and make that easier for consumers. And we'll continue to work with business to think of new innovative ways to kind of signal that kind of commitment to anti-slavery products, you know, that they, to the best of their ability, can verify as not having any kind of slavery or exploited labor in their supply chain. Although with the supply chains, as long as they are and as complex as they are and as global as they are, that's a huge ask. It
is, no, absolutely. But as you say, first step, to everyone listening this evening, a first step could be just once a week, just looking at what you are buying and what the consumers are. So that's a really good tip. I'm grateful.
Once a week, one product. You know, it doesn't have to be big, but it's got to start somewhere. And if we all did it, then, you know, we might find things changing a bit swifter.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Ben. Thank you for your advice. Thanks, you guys. Thanks for the tips as well.
Pleasure.
Steve Chapman, good evening to you. Are you with us, Steve?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you fine, Steve. Thank you. Obviously, you were the, until recently, the Wales Anti-Slavery Co-ordinator. So everything that you've heard this evening, Steve, from obviously fellow colleagues that you've worked with for a long time, in your time working on the modern slavery agenda, have you seen cases increase, and have you seen specific places where it's taken place?
Yes, I think it's a case of, you know, cases are increasing. But of course, some of the cases, like people who've been held for 13 years, 26 years, you know, they've been there a long time. And we know there's lots of these sorts of cases. I think what really does matter now is the awareness raising and people reporting cases. Previously, people thought, you know, they were in denial that slavery was going on. It wasn't until we had the case of Darrell Semester back in 2013, who'd been held for 13 years, a British person held by British people for, you know, for labour exploitation. When that hit the headlines, people realised that slavery was here. It was here in Wales, not just in London and the big cities, but here in Wales.
No, you're absolutely right, Steve. And, you know, we've heard a lot this evening from actually all of the guest speakers. Everybody has mentioned around that public perception, that public awareness, that training and awareness is absolutely key for the agenda being more robust in the future. So if any of our listeners this evening wasn't quite sure, and even myself, if I saw something that I thought didn't look right, didn't feel right, what advice would you give?
Hey man, we've been on this journey. When I take you back, that denial, what we had to do was a public campaign. We're fortunate that we've got in the UK a modern slavery helpline. The number is 08000121700. I don't have access to the chat line, but I'm sure you could put it into the chat line later. But we've always said if somebody sees something and, you know, that they're in fear of that person's life, because it could end up in a person losing their life, slavery, as we know, then dial 999. Obviously, we've got Crime Stoppers, another great organisation we work with, who deal with anonymous information, and calls are dealt with anonymously because we realise that people don't want to get involved, you know, but they've got to do the right thing. Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111. Again, if you could put that in the chat for me, please, I'd be obliged. Yes, cases are now being discovered. Cases where, you know, when we started Kim Ann back in 2012, 2013, who'd have thought we'd be discovering people in the countryside in Wales, in the towns, in the cities? You know, we were going up against people saying it doesn't happen here. Well, it does, and we know it does. And thanks to you, and especially what you're doing with the UK training group, you know, you're getting that message out, not just across Wales, but right across the UK. And you know, we heard earlier from our colleague Ruth on the Soroptomists. Well, some of the courses that they're running, who's to say that someone might be sat somewhere else in the UK, not in Wales, when they see something and they report these incidents. But what you're doing is you're saving lives, and you're also making Wales a safer place. I was very proud of the fact that the Welsh government have a coordinator. I've left now, and someone's taken my place. But and the work is going on. But all of you, you know, you all heroes on this line tonight, because you have made a very big difference, and you have, you know, not only just to people's lives, but saved people's lives.
Lovely, thank you, Steve. And just finally, to wrap up, everyone on the call, we're all members of the public. We're all really, really important within our own local community. And I think that you've heard, and from Steve giving the numbers out as the last kind of call out and call for action, that those numbers are really, really important. So my ask this evening to anyone that's listening, put those numbers in your phone. You never ever know when you might need them. It's really important to understand the signs to look out for, understand what you do with the information, and don't ever be afraid to make the call, because your piece of information could be that final nugget that actually puts together that jigsaw. So never ever be afraid to make the call. As I've always said, sometimes you only get one chance to save a life, and I'm sure that we've inspired you this evening that even if you're already working in this field, there's more work to be done. As I say, we're all members of our own community, and great thank you to Wales National Opera, because it's really, really important that these kind of events, these kind of opportunities where we can actually raise awareness is really, really important. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time this evening. Thank you for dialing in. Thank you for allowing us to share our stories and ultimately raising awareness. So thank you very much. Thank you so much to the panel. Thank you so much, Welsh National Opera, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much. Take care.
And I think it's for me to step in to thank you, Kim Ann, and all the panel. Mike, you sort of really hit the nail on the head when you said about people joining the dots, because I think a lot of people, when we advertised these panel discussions, didn't really know what we're about. You know, we always say that opera can transform people's lives, and it sounds rather airy-fairy, but in fact, if people, in watching this very different production of Madame Butterfly, as you put it, join the dots and think about the resonance of what they've seen and how it applies to today, and the terrible situation that so many young people, so many people are in, not just young people, find themselves in today, I think we will have done a great service. So really my heartfelt thanks to all of you on the panel for enlightening us in this terrible subject. So thank you. And just to say, we have another panel discussion, slightly different area of Madame Butterfly on Thursday. I'll actually be chairing a panel talking about reinventing the narrative, and that's looking at, you know, some pieces which seem to be now almost unperformable, and how do we as arts organizations rethink them in order to allow the difficult subject matters contained with them to speak. And different topic, but same idea. So those of you who'd like to join in or tell people you know about the discussion, same time this Thursday coming up, 7 o'clock. Thank you once again, everyone, and come and see Madame Butterfly. Okay, take care now. Bye-bye.